This is the Sci-Fi Griot. I'm your host, Nicholas Cunningham. Over the last two episodes, we've been asking difficult questions. We asked whether science fiction is a reflection of who we are or a warning about where we're headed. Then we asked whether we actually listening to those warnings or just consuming them as entertainment. Today we arrive at the most uncomfortable question of all, because every future imagined in science fiction makes an assumption, sometimes quietly, sometimes explicitly. Who gets to survive the future? Not everyone does. Not everyone is protected. Not everyone is considered. And that truth says a lot about us. There's no such thing as a neutral future. Every imagined future reflects decisions. Who has access to resources? Who holds power? Who is considered essential? And who is considered expendable? When a science fiction story shows us a thriving society, someone benefited from that system. The real question isn't whether sacrifices were made. The question is, who was sacrificed? Science fiction doesn't invent inequality. It exposes how easily inequality is justified when it's framed as necessary. Look at Star Trek. The future is presented as inclusive. Humanity survived by learning to cooperate. Former enemies work together, such as the Klingons and the Federation. Difference becomes strength. By even here, survival has condition. Membership in the Federation requires shared values, alignment, participation in a collective vision. Star Trek asks an important question. Is survival universal, or is it extended to those who agree to the system? The optimism is real, but it's earned. The future survives because people choose restraint, ethics, and dialogue. That's not guaranteed, it's conditional. Battlestar Galactica presents a much harsher answer. Survival is not about ideals, it's about necessity. When extinction looms, humanity survives by making brutal choices. It survives by redefining morality. It survives by leaving people behind. The show forces us to confront a difficult truth. When survival is scarce, ethics become negotiable. So who survives isn't determined by justice, but by utility. That's the warning. Because once survival becomes the only value, everything else become expendable. The expanse strips survival down to systems. Earth survive, Mars survive, the belt struggles. Not because belters are weaker, but because the system was never designed for them to thrive. Survival follows power. Access to air, water, and opportunity is political. The future doesn't eliminate inequality, it organizes it. And the most dangerous part, the system doesn't need cruelty to function, it only needs indifference. When you look at Westworld, it introduced a different question, not about resources, not about fear, but about who counts. The hosts suffer because they are deemed less than fully human. Their pain is dismissed as artificial. Their lives are treated as renewable. Westworld asks, who decides when something deserves empathy? Or what happens when power gets to define personhood? The warning is clear. Once a system decides that some lives matter less, survival become a privilege, not a right. Afrofuturism challenges the entire framing. Instead of asking who gets to survive, it asks the question, who has historically been written out of the future altogether? For many marginalized community, survival isn't theoretical, it's generational. Afrofuturism insists the following: survival is not guaranteed, it is claimed, it is protected, and it is imagined intentionally. Wakanda represents a future where progress doesn't require erasure, where culture and innovation coexist. It reframes survival as agency, not permission. So when you line these futures up, a pattern begins to emerge. Survival is never random. It follows power. It follows values. It follows systems. It follows fear. And it follows empathy. Star Trek says survival requires effort and cooperation. Battlestar warns that fear will narrow who survives. The Expanse shows that system quietly decides winners and losers. Westworld exposes how easily we deny moral worth. Afrofuturism reminds us survival must be reclaimed by those excluded. So, different worlds, same question. Who do we protect when the future arrives? You know, the most dangerous idea in science fiction is that these questions belong to the future. They don't, they belong to the present today. Every policy, every system, every design choice answers the question of survival, whether it's openly or it's quietly. The future doesn't exclude people accidentally, it excludes them by design. And design reflects values. In closing, so who gets to survive the future? Well, that depends on who gets a voice today, who gets protected, who gets heard, and who gets remembered. Remember that science fiction doesn't predict the future, it reveals us. It shows us what we prioritize when things get hard and who we're willing to leave behind when the cost feels too high. Over these last 3 episodes, We didn't set out to predict the future. We simply asked whether science fiction reflects who we are, whether it warns us about where we're headed, and who gets to survive the futures we imagine. Those questions don't belong to science fiction alone, they belong to how we live, how we lead, how we design systems, and how we treat one another when fear, power, and progress collides. Science fiction doesn't give us answers, it simply gives us mirrors. And what we choose to do with that reflection is what determines the future we'll actually get. As we wrap up and close this series of questions about the future, about warnings, systems, and survival, I want to pause briefly before we move on. Because behind every system, behind every future imagined in science fiction, there are people carrying the weight of decision. So in the next episode, we'll step away from the big question and spend time with one leader who had to live inside them. And that was Benjamin Sisko from Star Trek, the Deep Space Nine. A captain shaped by loss, responsibility, and the cost of command. That's coming up next on the Sci-Fi Griot. Thank you for listening. This has been the Sci-Fi Griot, a place to slow down, to reflect, and to imagine carefully.